When you think of a Viking, what comes to mind? Probably a fierce warrior, right? A sea raider with a huge axe and, of course, a horned helmet. We've all seen them in movies and TV shows. But what if I told you that this image, the one we all know, is only a tiny fraction of the real story? What if the Vikings were much more than just raiders? What if they were some of the most influential traders, explorers, and city builders of their time? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the pop culture Viking and meet the real people who shaped our world in ways you might never have imagined. And spoiler alert, they didn't wear horned helmets. That whole idea was an invention for a 19th century opera. So, let's put the myths aside and discover the forgotten side of the Vikings. To understand how the Vikings became masters of the globe, we have to start with their greatest achievement, their ships. The Viking longship is an icon of engineering. These weren't just crude boats, they were technological marvels. They had a shallow draft, which meant they could sail up rivers deep into lands like France and Russia, but they were also incredibly seaworthy, capable of crossing the treacherous North Atlantic. Their clinker-built hulls, where the planks overlapped, gave them a unique flexibility, allowing the ship to bend and flex with the waves rather than breaking against them. This design was the key that unlocked the world for them. But a great ship is useless if you don't know where you're going. The Vikings were master navigators. They used the sun and stars, observing their positions with tools like the sun compass. They understood wind patterns, ocean currents, and the flight paths of birds. They could read the color of the water and the shape of distant clouds. This intimate knowledge of the natural world was their GPS, guiding them across vast unknown oceans with astonishing accuracy. With these incredible ships and skills, the Vikings didn't just raid, they traded. Their trade network was staggering in its scale. It was the medieval world's first truly global economy. From their Scandinavian homelands, they sailed west, establishing settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and incredibly, they reached North America nearly 500 years before Columbus, setting up a temporary settlement at Lonzo Meadows in modern-day Canada. They were the first Europeans to set foot on a new continent, but their reach extended far beyond the west. They sailed south, down the rivers of Eastern Europe, through what is now Russia and Ukraine. The local Slavic tribes called these Norsemen the Rus, which is where the name Russia originates. They journeyed all the way to the great cities of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and even further to Baghdad, the heart of the Islamic Caliphate. Imagine a Viking from a small Norwegian fjord bartering with a merchant in a bustling Baghdad marketplace. It sounds like fantasy, but it was reality. So, what were they trading? They brought valuable goods from the north, luxurious furs from Arctic animals, amber from the Baltic coast known as Nordic gold, and walrus ivory, which was as prized as elephant ivory. They also dealt in a grimmer commodity, slaves, captured during raids or purchased along their trade routes. In return, they brought back treasures from the wider world. From the Byzantine Empire and the Middle East came silver coins, beautiful silks, exotic spices, fine glass, and expertly crafted jewelry. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia are filled with these foreign goods. A Viking burial might contain Arabic coins, a Frankish sword, and Irish jewelry, painting a vivid picture of a deeply interconnected world. These Vikings were not isolated barbarians. They were sophisticated international merchants, moving goods, ideas, and cultures across thousands of miles. Their trade routes were the arteries of the early medieval world, pumping life and wealth from the frozen north to the sun-drenched south. The Vikings weren't just visitors either. Where they went, they often stayed, building settlements that grew into major towns and cities. They were urban planners and pioneers. Take Dublin, the capital of Ireland. It was founded by Norse Vikings as a trading post, a long fort or ship camp, in the 9th century. For nearly 300 years, it was a Viking city, a hub for their trade in the Irish Sea. The very layout of Old Dublin still echoes its Viking origins. Across the sea in England, they established a huge territory known as the Danelaw. Cities like York, which they called Jorvik, became bustling centers of Viking commerce and culture. Archaeologists in York have unearthed entire Viking Age streets, with workshops, houses, and artifacts that give us a stunningly detailed look at their daily lives. We see evidence of craftsmen working with wood, leather, and metal, and merchants selling goods from around the world. These weren't temporary camps. They were permanent, thriving communities. They built, they farmed, they integrated, and they left a lasting mark on the map. Even in the east, their settlements along the Dnieper River grew into the foundations of the Kievan Rus, the precursor state to modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Vikings were city builders, laying the groundwork for some of Europe's most important urban centers. So, why does the image of the violent raider persist so strongly, while the trader, the explorer, and the city builder are often forgotten? A big part of the reason is who wrote the history. The primary accounts we have of the Vikings come from their victims, mainly Christian monks in England and France whose monasteries were prime targets for raids. Naturally, their chronicles focus on the terror and destruction. They weren't interested in Viking trade policies or their innovations in shipbuilding. They were writing about the traumatic events they experienced. It's like trying to understand an entire country just by reading its crime reports. You get a very skewed and very negative picture. The Vikings themselves didn't write their own histories in the same way. Theirs was a largely oral culture, with stories passed down in sagas that were only written down centuries later. While these sagas are rich, they are not objective historical documents. Over time, the dramatic, violent image of the raider proved more compelling and simply stuck in the popular imagination. But as we've seen, this image is woefully incomplete. The real legacy of the Vikings is far more complex and fascinating than the horned-helmeted caricature. They were a transformative force in world history. Their daring exploration connected continents. Their vast trade networks stimulated economies and fostered cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. Their settlements grew into great cities that still stand today. They weren't just destroyers, they were creators, connectors, and pioneers. The Viking Age was a period of incredible expansion, not just of territory, but of knowledge, trade, and the boundaries of the known world. So the next time you see a depiction of a Viking, remember the story behind the stereotype. Remember the navigator gazing at the stars, the merchant haggling in a foreign bazaar, and the founder laying the first stones of a new city. That is the forgotten, and far more interesting, side of the Vikings. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which part of the Viking story surprised you the most. Until next time, stay curious.